This documentary is based on real, verifiable events surrounding the case of Taylor Rene Parker, convicted of the October 2020 murder of Reagan Simmons Hancock and her unborn child, Braxlyn Sage, in New Boston, Texas. All information is drawn from court records, reputable news outlets, and public reporting, including Texas Tribune: Texas woman sentenced to death for killing pregnant woman and abducting baby, Associated Press, AP. Taylor Rene Parker sentenced to death in Texas for murder of pregnant woman, CBS News coverage of the Parker trial and death sentence, 2022. Texas Department of Criminal Justice, TDCJ death row facts and inmate records court testimony and local news, Texarkana Gazette, KSLA, TAL, NBC 6. This documentary complies with YouTube's community guidelines and is intended for educational and journalistic purposes only. The final 24 hours of Taylor Rene Parker. Last meal, last words, Texas death row. The clock starts. Subscribe if you're brave enough to hear what really happens in the last 24 hours, because after tonight, nothing you thought you knew about Texas death row will feel the same. The morning is ordinary in the way terrible days often are. A thin line of gray settles over Gatesville, and inside a 6x9 cell on the O'Daniel unit, a woman wakes before the lights. Taylor Rene Parker lies still, measuring her breath against the machine hum of air conditioning, counting in fours the way a counselor once taught her. Inhale 4, hold 4, exhale 4, pretending rhythm can calm a storm. The ceiling above her is the same concrete she has studied for years, pale and pocked and indifferent. Somewhere down the run, a steel door claps shut. Keys answer with a cold chorus. On case files, she is the defendant in State of Texas v. Parker and the jurors' unanimous conclusion: capital murder. In headlines, she is the woman who planned a pregnancy that never existed and ended a life that did. Reagan Simmons Hancock, 21, 34 weeks along, a mother already. In the law's language, she is the reason another name appears on a line that will live with families forever: Braxlyn Sage, an infant who never made it home. The papers say the jury needed an hour to convict her in 2022, an hour more to decide what should come next. What comes next in Texas, everyone learns quickly. A sentence is pronounced in a courtroom, but the punishment is a place. It is this place. Regimented meals, head counts, controlled movement, a routine so tight it could be a tourniquet. And it is time, long, elastic, twisting time. Appeals that become years. Years that become a kind of geography. People outside imagine a red circled date on a calendar. Inside, the circle is always moving. At 6 a.m., a tray slides through the slot. Breakfast on the women's row is hot. There's coffee, eggs cooling in their steam, bread that tastes like every other morning. The men on death row in Livingston eat cold sacks on lockdown days. Parker has something warmer, though no one would call it comfort. Texas ended the ritual of special last meals years ago. No requests, no list. Whatever the kitchen serves the unit that day is what the condemned will eat, if they eat at all. Rumor says the policy changed over one man's untouched feast. Policy, in prison, is often a story someone tells to explain the weather. She sits on the edge of the narrow bed and looks at the small table where she keeps her letters. Some are from strangers, written in looping hands that urge repentance or mercy. Some are from people she once knew who never found words for what she did. A few are from family, careful, aching sentences that circle the only thing they cannot say out loud. She has learned to read between lines. Everyone here has. At 8 a.m., an officer stops at her door. Legal, he says, and his tone is neutral, a flat road through Badland. On death row, news travels in monosyllables. Her appellate lawyer's face appears behind glass an hour later, flattened by reflection and fluorescent light. They talk in the language of deadlines and standards of review, about errors that might matter and others that sound like they should but won't. She asks the question every condemned person asks in a dozen different ways: How much time? The lawyer answers the only way the honest ones can. Not today. Not yet. Appeals are scaffolding on soft ground. They hold you up until they don't. Back in the cell, the television outside her door carries a noon anchor's voice she can't control. She catches fragments, Gatesville, Huntsville, transfer procedures, and clicks the sound off in her mind. If a date is ever set, Huntsville will be the last stop, the red brick building with the small, sterile room that has an oversized weight on Texas history. But that isn't today. Today is practice for that day. Eat, wait, call, wait, pray, wait. She writes a few lines on a pad she keeps for when language is the only thing that makes sense. What do you say when words last longer than breath? She scratches it out, starts again. In another town, Reagan's family is doing what families do when the system reopens the wound. They return calls, sign witness lists, decide who would go if it came to that, who could stand in the small room behind glass and watch a machine complete a sentence. The law calls them victim witnesses. Grief calls them by their first names. Their house still holds a baby blanket that was never used. Their front door still remembers the morning everything changed. The law moves on paper. Families move through rooms. Some nights, justice sounds like a promise. Others, it sounds like an echo. By late afternoon, the unit takes on its familiar hush. The dayroom TV flickers soundlessly with a game show where strangers guess prices and win applause. A chaplain passes, pausing to ask if she wants prayer. Sometimes she says yes. Sometimes she sits without speaking and lets someone else fill the air with words about mercy and consequence. Counseling notes talk about phases: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. But the paperwork doesn't record the hours a person spends hovering between them like a needle over a fault line. On good days, she tells her lawyer she didn't do what the jury says she did. On others, she talks about forgiveness like a country she has never seen. The light outside her small window tilts toward amber. On the men's row in Livingston, recreation happens in chain-link pens that look like kennels. At O'Daniel, the women step into a longer yard when staffing allows. 50 yards of concrete, a hoop, a lonely bench under a tree that keeps its own counsel. If her turn comes, she walks in loops until her thoughts exhaust themselves, then she stands and listens to wind combing the fence. A guard calls time and the door swallows her again. Evening pulls the unit tight. Dinner comes and goes. Mail is passed. Somewhere down the tier a woman laughs at a joke that doesn't carry. Off camera, a million opinions rise and fall, about punishment, about mercy, about whether a person who planned a lie so carefully can ever speak truth again. Inside, the night rearranges the questions but never answers them. Close to lights out, an officer returns with a form. Witness preferences, he explains, routine paperwork kept ready for a future that may never arrive. Who would she want present? Spiritual advisor? Media? She stares at the blank lines. The state is meticulous when it comes to endings. Times, escorts, searches, clothing, for access, the order of doors. The form is a checklist for a ceremony she cannot picture without feeling the room tilt. She signs where she must and hands it back through steel. Lights snap off and the tier drops to a low electrical hum. Night on death row is not darkness. It's a long dim hallway where sleep is borrowed, not owned. On the table, the pad waits. She picks up the pen and writes a sentence she doesn't cross out. If the day comes, I will say their names. She means it as a vow and maybe as a beginning. Across Texas, people are setting alarms for jobs they will hold tomorrow and the day after, the world continuing its ordinary churn. In Huntsville, the chamber sits quiet, the padded table strapped down to nothing at all. A clock on the wall marks time no one is watching. Somewhere in the state's files, a draft schedule for an execution day lies dormant. Breakfast, legal checks, transport, holding cell, witnesses, 6 p.m., a script waiting for actors who pray they never reach the stage. At midnight, A disturbance travels the unit like weather. A woman down the run wakes, screaming from a dream she can't explain. Officers move in a practiced wave. Calm returns, then drifts away again, leaving a low tide of whispers in its wake. Parker lies on her back, eyes open to the dark, and does the only math that matters here. How many breaths to morning, how many mornings to a date, how many appeals between a person and the state's perfection of procedure. When sleep finally taps her shoulder, it does not stay. The hum deepens, the building settles. In another county, a file lands on a clerk's desk with a stamped deadline 2 weeks away. An appellate attorney drafts an argument about evidence and error. A family sets aside a photo on the mantel, straightening the frame by habit. A chaplain marks a verse with a ribbon and shuts a book. Inside the cell, the pen slides off the pad and onto the floor. She doesn't hear it. The lights will rise at 6, the tray will come, and the clock will continue its slow, methodical spin. The last 24 hours, the ones the public imagines in saturated color and heavy music, have not arrived. But they cast a shadow forward, and tonight, the shadow reaches the foot of her bed. In a room she cannot see, a small red light blinks on a recorder as a message is left for her attorney. We got the notice. Denied. The voice is calm. The system is a ritual. The ritual is a road. Morning is coming. And when it does, a door somewhere will open to begin the last day. A legal notification has just been left after hours, denying the relief her team hoped would buy more time. The next call may be the one that sets the schedule in motion. The weight of the process. Texas does not rush its condemned. It draws the process out like a ritual, a long corridor of small steps leading to one sealed door. For Taylor Rene Parker, the clock ticks in 2 rhythms, the slow shuffle of years through appeals and the sudden, unstoppable countdown that begins the moment an execution date is signed. On paper, it is precise. 6 a.m. breakfast, 10 a.m. visits, 2 p.m. phone calls, 6 p.m. chamber. The Huntsville unit has performed this routine more than 500 times since the 1980s. The officials know it like muscle memory. For the inmate, it is a day measured in fragments, each minute shrinking, each hour pressing down harder. Inside her 6x9 cell at the Mountain View unit in Gatesville, Parker has spent over 2 years under this shadow. Her appeals wind their way through the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, the Fifth Circuit, the Supreme Court, paper shields against a machine that rarely stalls for long. She is 32 years old, and the statistics say she could wait decades. But the statistics also say something else. When Texas schedules, Texas execute. Every condemned prisoner is studied by psychologists. The reports describe stages of mind, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. But those tidy categories leave out the truth. A person can move through all 5 before breakfast and start them over again by lunch. In Parker's case, there is another layer. She cannot forget the calculated deception that brought her here. She faked a pregnancy, hosted a gender reveal party, posed with Reagan Simmons Hancock's wedding photos while planning her murder. When she is alone at night, the echoes of that planning return. Unlike a crime of passion, hers was deliberate, step by step. That knowledge is a heavier sentence than any judge can pronounce. For Reagan's family, the process is torture stretched thin. They receive notices of appeals, reversals, hearings. They endure interviews where they must recount details of the attack. In courtrooms, they sit yards away from the woman who turned a nursery into a crime scene. Justice promised them closure, but the appeals system demands patience that feels like punishment. The waiting never ends, Reagan's mother once said. We don't just lose her once, we lose her every time the court meets. If Parker's appeals fail, the Department of Criminal Justice will move her quietly. No announcement, no television cameras, just a dawn transfer in a secure van from Gatesville to Huntsville. Guards will escort her off the unit she has known, through hours of highway, to a red brick building whose very name, the Walls Unit, is synonymous with execution. She will not return. The night before an execution, the prison chaplain visits. He explains what will happen: the walk to the chamber, the straps on the table, the witnesses behind glass, the moment the warden gives the signal. Some inmates rage. Some collapse. Others go quiet. The chaplain's role is not to save them, only to walk with them, to speak words over the silence. At Huntsville, Parker will be placed in a holding cell just 30 feet from the death chamber. From that cell, she will smell the antiseptic in the air, hear the shuffle of officers preparing, know that each sound is for her. Hours before, she will be given the chance to make phone calls. Brief, monitored, one last connection to voices that will live beyond her. Some prisoners refuse to call, unable to bear the goodbye. Others cling to the receiver until the guard takes it away. And there is the matter of the final meal. In Texas, that choice was taken away in 2011. No steak, no ice cream, no feast of request. Parker's last meal will be whatever the kitchen serves the general population that evening: chicken, beans, bread, the ordinary made extraordinary only by circumstance. Her tray will look like every other tray, but the guards who slide it through the slot will know it is the last she will touch. At 5:30 p.m., she will be escorted from the holding cell to the chamber. The walk is short, steps only, but it is the longest walk of her life. Witnesses will already be gathered. Reagan's family in one room, Parker's in another, media lined with pens ready to write the final record. And then comes the one moment Texas allows her to shape her last words. Some inmates plead for forgiveness, some proclaim innocence, some spit anger at the system. Their words are recorded, preserved, archived. They become part of the state's permanent memory. Parker has told others she does not deserve freedom, that she carries what she did like a stone she cannot put down. Whether she will apologize, deny, or remain silent, that remains her only decision left. When the warden gives the signal, pentobarbital flows. Within seconds, consciousness fades. Within minutes, a doctor pronounces death. The state records the time, files the paperwork, and closes the file. For the family of Reagan Simmons Hancock, the chapter ends in a room with glass windows and a clock on the wall. For Parker, the chapters end forever. But as of now, this has not happened. She remains on death row, her appeals alive, her days measured not in hours but in the endless weight of waiting. The final 24 hours are coming, slowly, inexorably, but they have not yet arrived. The system is patient. The shadow waits. And when it falls, it will fall all at once. A new appeal deadline is approaching. If it fails, the paperwork to set Parker's execution date could be signed within days. Families in the shadow. The law is clinical in how it names people: defendant, victim, witness, appellant. But behind every word are families who wake every morning in rooms that remember. For Reagan Simmons Hancock's loved ones, the nightmare began on a quiet October morning in 2020, and it has not ended since. Reagan was 21, a mother of a 3-year-old daughter, expecting her second child, Braxlyn Sage. That life was taken not by a stranger but by a woman she trusted, a friend who had posed for her wedding photos, who had smiled at her baby shower. The betrayal was not just violent, it was intimate. And for her family, that is the wound that never scabs. Every hearing drags them back. Appeals arrive like summonses to reopen old rooms, relive old horrors, and listen again as lawyers dissect the morning their daughter's house turned into a crime scene. 142 witnesses testified at trial, each voice stacking another brick of truth. But for Reagan's family, truth is not closure. Each court date is another day of sitting in stiff wooden benches, listening to legal terms that barely mask the brutality. They have kept her photos on mantels, her baby blanket folded in drawers, her child's laughter alive in videos that now feel both precious and unbearable. They measure time not in appeals but in birthdays missed, milestones never reached. Reagan's daughter grows older every year. Her baby never had the chance. When the state sets an execution date, the family will be asked again if they wish to witness. Some want to. Some cannot. Families fracture around the question, does watching her death heal or reopen? But Parker's family suffers too, in a quieter, more complicated way. They sit in the gallery during trial, watching their daughter, their sister, their mother portrayed as a monster. They listen as prosecutors detail lies about pregnancies, a fake gender reveal, a murder that was planned with surgical cruelty. And they are left to reconcile the woman they love with the crimes she committed. 2 children of Parker's now live with the burden of her choices. They did not choose their mother's path, but the world will never let them forget it. They grow up in the shadow of whispers at school, the stain of headlines on their last name. For them, the execution is not justice but another theft of a parent, even if that parent committed the unthinkable. The appeals process tortures both sides. Reagan's family longs for finality, but each extension drags the wound open again. Parker's family clings to hope, each filing a fragile thread against the machinery of the state. The same system that delays for one side prolongs agony for the other. In Texas, death penalty cases last an average of 18 years before resolution. Some inmates have waited more than 3 decades. For families, that span is a purgatory, neither life nor death, just waiting. And in that waiting, the psychology is brutal. Experts describe it as compounded grief. Families of victims cannot heal while justice is incomplete. They replay the crime in their heads, unable to move forward. For families of inmates, it is a grief that hasn't happened yet but hangs like a storm cloud. Every letter, every phone call, every holiday carries the knowledge, this could be the last. Sometimes, the families meet in the same hallways outside the courtroom. They do not speak. The air between them is heavy with a truth neither side can share, that one act destroyed 2 families, not just one. Reagan's parents carry their daughter's absence. Parker's parents carry their daughter's shame. The scales of justice weigh heavily, but grief is not something a verdict can balance. As Parker's legal team files the next appeal, Reagan's family prepares for another round of hearings. They rehearse victim impact statements again, words they have said before, words they will have to say again until the last gavel falls. And still, at the end, there is the final, unbearable question. Does an execution heal what was broken, or does it only end a life without ending the pain? For now, the appeals grind on. Judges read brief. Lawyers argue over procedure. Reporters wait for headlines. Families wait for something that feels like justice. And in the middle of it all sits Parker, in her small cell, caught in the machinery she set in motion herself. The law promises answers. Families know better. A notice is expected soon from the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. If they deny Parker's motion, the next step will not be another hearing, it will be the signing of a date, the day the final 24 hours truly begins. The machinery of death. When the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals denies the final motion and the governor signs off, the clock stops stretching. It locks into place. A date is set, and from that moment the process is no longer theoretical. The state has a script, and it follows it with relentless precision. 6 a.m., the last morning at Mountain View Unit in Gatesville, an officer raps on the steel door. Breakfast arrives through the slot. The tray is ordinary, eggs, toast, maybe oatmeal. There are no feasts in Texas. Since 2011, condemned inmates receive the same meal as everyone else. What makes this one different is not what's on the tray but the knowledge. It is the last breakfast Parker will eat alive. 8 a.m. All appeals closed by this hour, Parker is formally informed that there will be no more stays, no more legal reprieve. The chaplain arrives, calm and steady, explaining each step of what is to come. For some inmates, this is the moment reality crashes in. For Parker, it is the point where imagination becomes schedule. 10 a.m. Final visitors begin through reinforced glass partitions. Parker is allowed to see her approved visitors. Family members who choose to come, her children, if permitted, her parents, speak through phones bolted to the wall. Every word feels weighted, every silence heavier than speech. Some families weep, others hold composure, knowing the goodbye will end in less than an hour. At the same time, Reagan's family receives official notice to travel to Huntsville if they wish to witness the execution. Noon, clemency deadline by midday. Any last-minute pleas for clemency reach the governor's desk. Rarely are they granted. For Parker, there will be no reprieve. The weight of the law is already moving toward Huntsville. 2 p.m. Witness lists finalized. Corrections officers confirm names of those who will watch the execution. Victim's family in one room, condemned's family in another, media representatives noted in careful ink. Paperwork ensures no mistakes. The state records everything: who was present, who spoke, who stayed silent. 3:30 p.m. Transport to Huntsville. The most secretive step begins. Without announcement, Parker is moved under heavy guard into a secure van for the 2-hour trip to Huntsville. The exact route is kept confidential to prevent disruption. She travels with a file containing her legal record, medical documents, and execution orders. The vehicle rolls down highways under the Texas sun, and every mile carries her closer to the small red brick fortress where more than 500 inmates have taken their final breath. 5:30 p.m. The holding cell. Upon arrival at Huntsville's Walls Unit, Parker is led 30 feet from the death chamber into a stark holding cell. She is fingerprinted, strip-searched, and given clean white prison clothing. From this cell, she can hear the quiet preparation: doors opening, papers shuffling, the muted voices of staff rehearsing a ritual they have done many times before. This cell is the point of no return. 6 p.m. The door opens. Guards escort her down a short hallway to the chamber. Witnesses file into their separate viewing rooms. Reagan's family on one side, Parker's on the other, separated by thick glass. Media shuffle in with notepads. Everyone waits for the door to open. The chamber itself is sterile, almost small enough to be mistaken for a hospital room. In the center lies the padded table with leather strap. Once Parker is secured, the 4 lines are inserted. The warden asks if she has any final words. This is the only part the state cannot script. Some inmates apologize. Some deny. Some remain silent. Whatever Parker chooses, her words will be written into the record, carried in headlines, repeated in whispers long after. For Reagan's family, they will be the last sound they ever hear from the woman who took their daughter. When the signal is given, the pentobarbital flows. Within 10 seconds, consciousness fades. Within minutes, death is declared. The time is recorded, the certificate filed, and the chamber cleared. Reagan's family walks back into the night carrying absence. Parker's family leaves with silence where a voice used to be. The entire procedure, from the walk to the pronouncement, rarely exceeds 20 minutes. The years of appeals, the hours of waiting, the decades of pain all collapse into that brief, clinical window. The state calls it closure. Families call it something else, survival. But tonight, this is only the description of what will come. Parker remains in Gatesville, still fighting appeals, still waiting in her 6x9 cell. Yet every woman on death row in Texas knows the choreography by heart. And Parker, more than most, can already see herself on that table, staring at the ceiling as history closes in. Parker has drafted fragments of a final statement. She cannot decide whether to apologize, confess, or remain silent, but soon the choice will be made for her. The last words. The last 24 hours are not loud. They are not cinematic in the way television shows would have us believe. They are quiet, suffocating hours filled with small movements and the heavy weight of time. And when the final door opens, silence follows like a shadow. In Huntsville's red brick walls unit, the chamber waits. The padded table sits beneath fluorescent light, sterile, unremarkable, like a medical bed in a room that has seen too much. Beyond two thick glass windows, witnesses gather. On one side, Reagan Simmons Hancock's family. The mother who buried her daughter, the husband who lost his wife, the child who will grow up with memories she cannot fully understand. On the other side, Parker's family, torn between grief and shame, watching their loved one taken by the same system that promised justice to the other side. When the guards escort her in, Parker's face is pale but composed. She has chosen her clean state-issued clothing, her hair tied back. The straps secure her wrists and ankles to the table. The 4 lines are taped down carefully, the warden at her shoulder. The ritual pauses for one thing only, her final statement. The microphone hums softly. All eyes turn to her. This is the last piece of the script that belongs to the condemned. What does a person say when the words will outlast the body? Some have chosen rage, spitting venom at the state. Others have chosen peace, whispering prayers or apologies. Parker's lips part and the room stills. Whether she apologizes, whether she clings to denial, whether she says nothing at all, her words are etched into the record. For Reagan's family, those words will echo far longer than the injection itself. When she finishes, the warden nods. The curtains shift. A technician in another room begins the injection. Pentobarbital enters the bloodstream. Within 10 seconds, Parker's eyes flutter, her chest slows. Within minutes, the doctor leans close, checking for signs of life. At 6:20 p.m., the death certificate is signed. The witnesses file out, some in tears, some in silence, some unable to say what they felt at all. Outside, the Texas sun dips low, casting the town of Huntsville in gold, as though it has not just hosted another execution. Reporters rush to file their stories. Officials make their statements. Another name is added to the list of the executed. But this story is not hers alone. It belongs to Reagan, who never got to finish her 20s. It belongs to Braxlin, who never took her first breath outside the womb. It belongs to Reagan's daughter, who carries memories of a mother lost too soon. And it belongs to 2 families, one broken by violence, the other broken by the knowledge of what their daughter became. For the state, the chapter ends with paperwork. For the families, it does not end at all. Death row may close a file, but grief never closes. The system calls it justice. Survivors know better. They carry scars the state cannot see, scars that outlive both the killer and the sentence. Taylor Parker's story is one of deception, betrayal, and cruelty. But it is also a story about the failures of community, of silence in the face of obvious lies, of untreated mental illness that metastasized into violence. It is a warning written in blood and sorrow. Unchecked desperation can escalate into unthinkable tragedy. And so the chamber empties. The red light above the door clicks off. Texas readies itself for the next name, the next file, the next story. But in New Boston, where Reagan once smiled in photographs taken by the woman who would later betray her, the absence remains. Her family will never stop saying her name. Reagan Simmons Hancock. Braxlin Sage. They are the ones who deserved chapters that were stolen from them. And as the camera fades, the question lingers like smoke. Does ending a life ever balance the scales of justice, or does it only deepen the shadows left behind?